Oh, it's a cold opening today because I'm still in Puerto Rico. But hello, everybody. This is Rolo, the Puerto Rican pistolero, coming to you live from, as I said, the Puerto Rican studios here on the beautiful island, which I've called my home here for the last few months. It is great to be back. Let me know how I'm coming through 5 by 5 here. If you can hear me well, it's been a long time since I have done a Rolo's Rants episode. I don't have the music, I don't have the cool video anymore. Uh, I mean, I have those things, but they're just not here with me because I don't have my awesome studio here. I'm on the go, and I've extended my trip here for much longer than I ever expected, and that's going to continue to be the case. I see Den Hog Tua, Socrates Magote, the Wayfarer. I'm sure that we will have more joining in a little bit. I was going to do a live pour, but the way that I have things set up here, I don't even have my regular coffee mug. So I've got my Puerto Rican mug here. I got some water in the other one. And the stove here is extremely good. So I'm actually afraid to pour the coffee from that um, from that percolator here. Because if any of it gets on me, it's going to be like acid that just cuts through my body and melts me instantaneously. And it's very painful. But I've got my coffee. Hopefully, you guys do as well. Today, I am drinking. So I'm actually going to start a little bit different here because I haven't been on in a few months. So I haven't really talked about the aftermath of the election, how everything worked out, the inauguration, all that. I'm not going to go into details. But obviously, there has been a lot going on over the last few months in the United States. Things have been incredible. We've been seeing President Donald Trump and his administration doing things at a pace that I don't think any of us expected. It has been a whirlwind of executive orders undoing some of the damage that was done, not just by the Biden administration, but presidencies over the last 3 or 4 decades, and really taking America to the position where it's supposed to be as a position of leadership, but also making sure that America is first and that the American people, above everything else, are first. So I think that's fantastic. And one of the things that, we've been seeing here is obviously using tariffs uh, as a means to push policy that we want from other countries, be that with cooperation, trying to balance trade and push American products. So I know that a few weeks ago, President Trump is had a bit of a kerfuffle with his deportations with the socialist president of Colombia. And one of the things that I suggested is rather than purchasing coffee from a country like Colombia, which is obviously not America, that people turn to a Latin locale that is part of America, that has whose people are American citizens by default, and that is Puerto Rico. So today's coffee is Cafe Crema, which is grown here locally in Puerto Rico. It is one of many fantastic brands here in Puerto Rico. I'm not being sponsored by them or anything like that. I don't have any coffee sponsors, but I do recommend checking out some of the different coffee blends that Puerto Rico has to offer. So I've been here, like I said, since December, and I think that some of the coffee here is fantastic, some of the best coffee in the world. And I would encourage you to check it out. If you're in Florida, especially Central or South Florida, you can find a lot of these brands. If you want to look for some of them online, you can go to, I'm going to drop the link here in the chat, just to toot the horn here of the local economy. And that is prcoffee.com. Actually, let's just share the screen here. Why don't we just do that? So you can go to prcoffee.com and go to ground coffee. We'll copy this right here. If you want to order online, you can go ahead and do that. Check out your local grocery store. It may exist there and you may not have known it. the entire time. So I am drinking cafe crema right now, which is great. It was established in 1925 by Don Jose Pepe Garrido Morales and his wife Matilde Alonso. It's an ode to nature, perseverance, and passion. So you can see right here the ground bag and check that out for yourself. It's a nice medium roast. Mm, and it's fantastic. One of my favorite coffee brands here is Yaucono. I've had this quite a few times. Cafe Rico's fantastic too. But you can check out all of the different blends right there. Maybe I'm gonna have to get these guys as a sponsor on the show, but go ahead and check that out. And it is a an alternative to foreign, mostly Colombian coffee. You can support not only Puerto Rico but fellow Americans because as many of you should know by now, and if you don't, it's shameful. But I know that we have some international listeners here who may not know the geography of the United States. Puerto Rico is a commonwealth of the United States. So if you want to support Americans and American coffee, get some Puerto Rican coffee. So that's my little aside there and advertisement. I wish there was a promo code Rolo Roast. There is no promo code. They have a 10% off there. You can check that out or check out your local grocery store and you can see the brands here and go ahead and look for them in your coffee aisle. So that's it. We're talking about the tariffs. So that's one way that you can circumvent that. Buy more American products, whether it is food products or clothing products, anything like that. American vehicles. Make sure that they are made here in the U.S. of A. And that you can support your fellow countrymen and women, and let the deportations continue. It's funny that living in the part of Puerto Rico that I do, you actually are exposed to a lot of the illegal immigration that happens in the Caribbean, coming from the Dominican Republic. So I live right on the coast, on the ocean, and we can see Customs and Border Patrol helicopters, Coast Guard helicopters, local Puerto Rican State Police boats going all the time. They've been making a ton of busts, not only with drug cartels, but with illegals trying to come over. And it's really stepped up since the inauguration. The amount of flights that are going on, pretty much every day. I've got helicopters flying by from one of the Coast Guard and Border Patrol stations not too far. I mean, the island's not that big anyway. So you go 30 miles in every direction or 30 minutes in every direction. There's stuff going on. But it's been something great to see. It's been a huge change. And, I've got some personal connections to things that are going on with the illegal crackdown here and the deportations. So I can maybe one day get a little bit more insight, but I'm not at liberty to discuss at this time. It's not me. It's not me. I have a family member that works directly with some of the things that are going on in places where some hardcore illegal criminals may get sent to. So, so that's great. Uh, it's great to see how quickly President Trump has been working on things here and really been going on really a huge offensive here. I think for too long, Republicans were essentially just a paid opposition party. They were part of the uniparty themselves. And we could see that they were just paying lip service to conservative values, to national security, to the border crisis, to trade. And for years, we saw the neocons take us on expeditions all over the world to fight wars that we had no business uh, being in, expanding objectives, and really destroying the Constitution. So I think that this has been a travesty, and we know that the Democrats have obviously been doing the same. They've been pushing woke policies, illegal immigration. suppressing free speech here at home and trying to institute authoritarian policies that affected you and I while benefiting major corporations and non-citizens in the United States, whether it's the drug cartels and people coming in from you know, Central and South America, or the invasion from the Middle East, and allowing Islamic extremism to get a foothold in this country. It's been a massive crisis, much of our own doing as a as the U.S. government has perpetuated and stolen, has perpetuated stereotypes about the American people that are negative and plundered our treasure while sending our brave men and women overseas and sacrificing their lives for their own agenda in the military industrial complex. So it's fantastic to see that Trump is starting to reverse that. I do think that one caveat I would have is that Congress really needs to step up at this point, because as we've seen Trump able to undo executive orders that were, enacted by previous administrations, the same thing will happen to him if we happen to lose. And we know that at every turn, the uniparty and the left are going to try extremely hard to do that, or they're going to try to gum up the works with lawfare once again, which has been one of their favorite tactics over the past 4 years, as we've seen this president, then candidate Trump, and now President Trump going through with a lot of what DOGE is doing, getting tied up in the courts. And I think that's going to be their number one tactic. They know that they've lost to the American people because the election was so decisive. It was really a trifecta, with not just winning the Electoral College, which has been commonplace for Republican administrations over the last couple of decades, but winning the popular vote, which really secures the mandate, and also being able to continue to secure Congress. So that's a huge step in the right direction, but without making these executive orders into permanent legislation, it will be extremely difficult to maintain this momentum if, for whatever reason, Republicans lose power. But I think that the direction that we're going in, how JD Vance, especially recently, has has done exemplary work overseas. I think that having, having the next few years be completely under populist conservatist control, if you conservative control, I should say, if you can even call it that. They're kind of different ideologies when we think about it, but a pro-America policy going forward, a constitutional policy going forward, I think that there's a solid chance that that will absolutely continue. So, but I think we do have to be vigilant. I've always said it here over the years. My One of my favorite quotes is "Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty," and I think that with the exposure that we're starting to see with the government corruption, and even the strategy that the Trump administration has taken, it's going to be very difficult for the deep state, the uniparty, the left, whatever you want to call them, all of the above, the media industrial complex, to really push back against this, because now it is laid bare for even the normies to see. So I don't know if USAID or USAID, however you want to call it, was intentional. Greg the Goblin with the 20. Thank you so much, Greg the Goblin. He just rolls in in that truck, drops the 20 on the table, doesn't say a thing, and just tips his hat, says thank you, sir, for coming back, and walks right out of that saloon. Thank you so much, Greg the Goblin. You've always been a real one, and you've always been a great supporter of what I have done here over the years, even though I have not been going on one of my rants as of late. I appreciate you. I don't have the applause to be able to throw on here. I have to figure out how to do that at some point, since I'm going to be here for a while in Puerto Rico. So where was I? See, I lose my tangent when I do that. That's what happens when you have ADD. So I think USAID. So I think focusing on USAID has been brilliant because even though USAID may not have the budget of, you know, the military, it may not be the Treasury or the Fed or the Department of Education or one of the intelligence agencies, it really shows how deeply rooted and utterly ridiculous the government corruption is throughout the world. And I know I've mentioned Mike Benz in the past on the show, and some of the work that he's done with working at the State Department. And he always explained, I played that clip, I think on episode 23 of the show, of him discussing this. USAID really does the dirty work that the CIA is afraid to do themselves. And they've had a blank check. We know that with DOGE being controlled by Elon Musk and auditing these agencies, they've exposed that essentially any request for aid or money that it was given to USAID was approved with no questions asked. So whether it's transgender studies in Morocco or whatever crazy thing is going on, different plays, uh, musicals throughout the world, millions of dollars being sent to contraceptives in the Middle East, it has laid bare and exposed the insanity and the absolute corruption that we are dealing with. And I think by starting there and really making it obvious to people in this country and throughout the world just how utterly stupid a lot of this has been, it makes it much easier now to go after the big dogs, which are the intelligence agencies, the military industrial complex, and even some of the welfare programs that exist in this country, especially as far as how they're giving money to illegal immigrants. So I've got a few different opinions on all of this. I'll go through all of that. I do want to talk a little bit uh, about welfare and things like that because I think this opens the door for really bringing that and focusing those programs and actually helping Americans. And I know that that's not been a conservative viewpoint in the past, but it is a much more populist viewpoint. And I think that that's something that the Trump administration should work on and do well. And obviously, my being a Christian, I do care about um, helping people that are in need, especially if they need it. And for too long, we've been giving money to illegals while we see Americans die on the streets, either by being murdered by illegals, criminals that are here, being infected and decimated by the drug epidemic and the fentanyl epidemic that are affecting this country, or even seeing Americans die because they can't get prescription drugs at a reasonable cost and illegals get their health care paid for. It's utterly ridiculous. It's out of control. And we really have to reshift our focus, especially if we're going to start saving money in this country. So, those are all things that I think we need to discuss and that we need to have new discussions about because sometimes I see a little bit of a hypocrisy with the way that the Republican Party and conservatives have done things in the past. And I think that there's a few events that have happened lately that have exposed some of that hypocrisy. And I know that our boy that's running Doge, Elon Musk, is kind of the victims of one of those. But I'm not going to focus on the gossip and the palace intrigue until the end of the show because I think that's not as important as a lot of the other things that have been going on more recently. So I think we're going to start it at the top and we're going to talk about pretty much America's place in the world, what we've gone through. We had, constant terrorist attacks that we're seeing both at home and abroad with Islamic extremism being an issue and with freedom of speech being suppressed in some of our so called allied countries. So I think that uh, what JD Vance did at the Munich Security Conference this weekend was not only one of the best speeches that we've seen from an American politician in decades, probably since Ronald Reagan's Tear Down This Wall speech, uh, in the 80s. But I think it's something that really I've advocated for a long time, something that Donald Trump obviously mentioned in his first administration, with NATO not paying their fair share. But I really think that the U.S. essentially has very few or no allies left, especially in Europe. We have seen how the European Union, and I went on a little bit of a tirade about this. I tweeted out about this a few days ago, and I'll bring up that tweet just so that I've got it as a reference point here. I think that here we go. So this was the original tweet, and let's share the screen here. It is Europe breaking. This is from House Judiciary GOP. Europe tells American big tech to censor globally. With new expansive censorship laws on the books, the EU can now effectively force American companies to take down posts globally, including in the United States. Under recent European case law, a European country can order a takedown globally. Read for yourselves the cases from Europe's highest courts, including the European Court of Justice. So we can check this out. It is up to member states to ensure that the measures which they adopt and which produce effects worldwide take due account of those rules. In light of all the foregoing, the answer to the first and second questions in Directive 2000 31, in particular Article 15, must be interpreted as meaning that does not preclude a court of a member state from ordering a host provider to remove information which it stores, the content of which is identical to the content of information which was previously declared unlawful, or to block access to that information, ordering a host provider to remove information which it stores, the content of which is equivalent to the content of information which was previously declared to be unlawful, or to block access to that information. Ordering a host provider to remove information covered by the injunction or to block access to that information worldwide within the framework of the relevant international law. To conclude, it follows from the foregoing considerations that the court of any member state may, in theory, adjudicate on the removal worldwide of information disseminated via the internet. So, and my response to this a few days ago was, and I had one person who got a little bit angry about it. Devin De Piazza, thank you for the $5 super chat. Let's freaking go. I agree. Thank you so much. We need to crash the EU economy over this, pull out of NATO, let Russia keep whatever they want in Ukraine, and cut off all military contracts. To me, this is a declaration of war against free speech and proves that the U.S. has no allies in Europe. This authoritarian crap peddled by the CCP needs to end. And I got some spicy responses there. Somebody asked me, I want to destabilize the world over free speech. Well, sir, I would say that the world is destabilized without free speech. And the reason why we are in the mess that we have been in for the last couple of decades, at least, has been because of the suppression of speech on social media platforms and in the media, all in the name of political correctness and the expansion of authoritarianism throughout the globe, perpetuated by this government, meaning the US government, the governments of Europe, and of course, funded in large part by our good friends, the Chinese Communist Party. And we know that Europe and the Democrat Party in the United States and the authoritarian right, the neocons, they love them some censorship. They love how China is able to control information and control its populace. They really do. There's nothing more that they want than that type of power and control over you and I and the citizens of the free world as we know it. And China's more than happy to give it to them because they know that being one of the top disseminators of these controls and having the example that they have built up over decades that they need to do that they want to push this regime and they want to be in control over it. So it's pretty simple. if you want to do business with American companies, if you want American backing, then you have to espouse our values, or else you're not worth being an ally. It doesn't matter if we have decades or centuries of shared history, if we are willing to throw it all away because you're angry about what some people are saying on the internet. And just as JD Vance said at the Munich Security Conference, if a few $100,000 spent by Russia to hire bots on social media is enough to turn the course of an election so that you can shut it down, like what happened in Romania recently, then are your governments that stable? And are you doing the will of the people that would work? You need to look in the mirror and you need to listen to your people and see what they want. They don't want to have their speech suppressed when they complain about immigration policies that have eroded the fiber of European cultures and that have imported millions of people who have no standards, that who don't share our standards, who don't share our values, and in many cases, if you offend their religious beliefs, they will want you beheaded in the streets, who want to enact Sharia law to push back all of the decades of women's rights and the rights of other individuals that we have built up over the years, and that want to kill anybody that doesn't praise Allah or push their religion throughout the globe. So, I mean, and then on our side of the fence as well, people who want to sell us drugs that are killing us, poison our population, and to suck dry a welfare system that is barely capable of helping the people who are actually paying into it in the first place. So we have a serious problem. And if you are too angry to be able to address the issue, now, it could be several reasons why they don't want to address the issue. And Europe has some serious problems. And the problem that Europe has is a few fold. And hopefully, some of how's it going, Hypnotic? Great to see you. I see Kamo in the chat, Valiant Thor, A2D2, JM the Elite Fan, uh, Dom the Rogue Attraction. Great to see you all here. I'm going to turn this fan off. It's gotten cold enough. It is multifold here. And I get it. Europe has been starting wars on its continent for like 1,000 years. Let's be honest. And I can imagine that after World War II, I know this for a fact, everybody was a little bit afraid of having national pride because there were some guys in Germany that caused some serious problems by pushing nationalism, National Socialism, by the way. Um, and racist ideologies. But you know what? There's nothing wrong with respecting your own history and traditions, with having certain moral viewpoints and and ideals that you espouse that have lifted up Western society for the last few hundred years, and that led to the direct creation of this country that I live in, the United States, and that many of you live in as well. And it's ironic to see that some of the great powers that push these values uh, push them for a while, but they have a history of going back on them, like Great Britain, who we based a lot of our constitution on British common law, even the Second Amendment and things like that came from British law and British tradition, legal traditions. It's ironic to see these countries pushing back. And I get it. There was a trauma that was left behind from the constant wars over multiple centuries. I mean, we go back to World War II was the most recent one before the war in Ukraine. We go back, well, and the Cold War as well. We can't forget that because that was a conflict. So we got World War II, we got World War One. We go back to the empire building. We've got the Napoleonic Wars, 100 years wars. We can go back and forth here. So basically, 1,000 years where every century Europe has multiple wars over nationalistic ideals. Now, a lot of that is because Europe had a bunch of authoritarian governments for just as long, for centuries. There were empires, monarchies, and all of the above, and very few democracies and republics that existed at the time. And that was a huge problem. So rather than, sorry about that, rather than, going full ham. See, the problem is that Europe overcorrected. They went from having authoritarian regimes and being afraid of ultranationalism to going full mob democracy, giving up all sovereignty and destroying all of the traditions that made a lot of these countries great and fantastic. It's a reason why we love as Americans visiting Europe many times because they are a collection of unique cultures that have a history that goes back hundreds and even thousands of years. And to see them throw that all away in the name of wokeness, because let's be honest, manipulation through globalist organizations, uh, political regimes, and getting rid of their sovereignty through the European Union and NATO has completely destroyed the fabric of these nations. And now the chickens are coming home to roost because you also created a situation where you are able to, because you're protected by the United States, and the US is to blame for this as well. Let's not get it twisted because we decided that it would be a good idea to completely subsidize their militaries so that we can build bases throughout the world. So we are to blame for a lot of this as well. But at least we are correcting this through the Trump administration and through the populist movement here that we have in the United States. But Europe needs to follow. Now, the advantage that we have in the United States is that whether the uniparty authoritarians like it or not, we still have the US Constitution. Now, they may wipe their asses with it many times, and we can see that the Democrat Party and the courts definitely love to do that. They treat the Constitution as if it doesn't exist, and it's an inconvenience to them. However, it still does exist. It's still there. It is still technically the law of the land, and any of us can go and point to it and say, "You guys can't do this crap." That doesn't happen here. Europe does not have that equivalent, not anymore. And so we have freedom of speech. We have the Second Amendment, the other amendments in the Bill of Rights. Europe does not have that. So our government is always in check because we have those two safety valves, especially those first two amendments, and that's why they are the first two, where our government, no matter what they want to do, at the end of the day, they know that we can break that glass and pull out that fire extinguisher, and we've got a little bit of a say here to prevent authoritarianism in the United States. So, how have they now? They know that, so they've tried to subvert it, and that's through bread and circuses. It's a saying that goes back to the Roman Empire. And what are bread and circuses? It is basically entertaining us, distracting us, manipulating the media, psychological warfare, and things like that. They've made our lives so comfortable that we really don't pay attention. And that is something that has happened in Europe as well. Europe has been very comfortable for a long time, is because of their welfare state, not need the protection of the United States. They've been able to suppress their populations by giving them health care, social safety nets, all things that I'm sure a lot of people like, and many people complain that we don't have the equivalent of in the United States. The problem is you can't have those things if you also have open borders and you bring in people that do not assimilate, have not paid into the system, and don't give a crap about your culture and your ideals, and that you've allowed to invade and infect your society, and that you've allowed to enact their and impose their will upon you. So when you have a country like Great Britain, that you have people practicing Sharia law, and regular Britons uh, can't call it out, and they're called racist or thrown in prison or arrested for their social media posts, you have a serious freaking problem. And I don't know how these societies break through with that. So it is absolutely insane what is going on. So I think that it's crazy what we're starting to see here, and it really plays into the hands of all of our enemies, right? It really does. So I think that we need to stand, and we have to stand for freedom of speech, and that is really how we are able to move on. So, and yes, Patriot from Warsaw, you're correct. That's it. It's the road to serfdom, and unfortunately, Europe has a history of doing this. And I think that's why, in a lot of ways, it's almost ingrained culturally, and it's almost in the DNA of Europeans to allow authoritarianism to take over because it's been happening for so long. But there's always a backlash. There's always a push, and that is why so many immigrants from Europe came to the United States to escape a lot of that. And so we need to there's something that we have to do, and I think that what JD Vance's speech did the other day was to give people hope in Europe to try to push back against the politicians that are there. Now it'll be difficult because the EU has taken so much of the sovereignty over European states, and that's something that they're going to have to work on. So it's going to come down to you're going to have to protest. You're going to have to push back against these immigration policies, and you're going to have to take your countries back. And I don't know if it's too late to do that completely peacefully or through the democratic process, or if it's going to take something a little bit more. I'm not advocating for violence here or anything like that. But the fact of the matter is that, unlike in the United States, where we can kind of point at the Second Amendment and tell these people, well, you can frack around and find out. It's it's just something that you need to you need to do something about. So my fear really is that, especially in a country like the UK, that you're allowing foreign forces to come in that believe in a suicidal ideology, which is Islamic extremism, Sharia law, things like that, to embed itself into your countries. And these are countries with advanced weaponry and nuclear weapons as well. So we've tried for years to prevent Iran and other countries in the Middle East from getting nuclear weapons, but we're allowing those very same people to change the fabrics and the governments and the ideologies of countries that already have nuclear weapons and advanced weaponry that are part of the NATO alliance. And that means that they uh, also have access to NATO weaponry and advanced American technology. So I don't know what you do. I don't know what you do. I know that a lot of countries like, Hungary and Poland have pushed that. Patriot from Warsaw, you can probably explain a little bit more. I know that Poland has had a little bit of a back and forth in its politics over the years, but they've gotten the message when it comes to expanding their military once again and really caring about their own sovereignty. But Uh, I don't know if it's too late. And I do actually fear, in a lot of ways, that, the leaders in the EU have been perpetuating that World War III is going to be caused by Russia and the war in Ukraine. I don't think that's the case. I think that the real World War III is going to be the fall of European countries with the crisis of their open borders and giving people that have come in that don't share their values now access to those governments and to those weapons. And then we're going to have to go in there and clean up that mess one way or the other as the United States, which I really don't want us to have to do. I really don't. So, and it's probably going to happen that we're going to have to allow Europeans to immigrate to the United States that want to escape their corrupt governments and the sinking ship. And again, that's not something that I want to happen either, because it shouldn't be happening in Europe. It really shouldn't be happening. So that's something that needs to happen. And I don't know how cultures that have been so neutered and emasculated are going to be able to push back against this, because in the US, we can achieve what we're seeing with these mass deportations, pushing back across the border. I don't know if Europe can do that, because here in the US, we haven't allowed Islamic extremism to get the same foothold. I mean, believe me, we've got it. It's here. Um, but we also have a much larger population. Again, we still have the Second Amendment. The American people won't tolerate a lot of this stuff, and we have more. We've got more Judeo-Christian principles than Europe. Europe has kind of fallen more towards atheism and agnosticism. So there's no like spiritual counter to this, which I do believe that there is a spiritual aspect to a lot of this stuff. I'm not talking Christian nationalism or anything like that. You can be a non-believer and still be great. Lord knows we've seen hypocritical people that are religious as well, or that use that as a shield. But there is an aspect to all of this that pushes back, because you need to have a counter cultural drive against Islamic extremism. And I'm not going to make any bones about it. I think that Islam does not share Western values. You can there are people who've come from the Middle East who can assimilate into the West, but I think that fundamental Islam does not mesh with the West as far as our values of freedom of speech and I mean freedom of expression, especially, and women's rights. That's just not really compatible with that if we're talking about religious fundamentalism. So I don't really think that that's possible. I don't think that's going to work. And we've seen how countries have tried to integrate that, and it seems to always fail. It isn't. There needs to be secularism here. So Sharia law is not compatible with Western ideals and Western ideology. And you can't have a two-tier system of justice, because it's one thing to respect religious freedom, and it's another to allow people's rights to be taken away because they say that their religion allows that. That's just not going to fly. So, there's definitely an incompatibility there, and there needs to be a change. And if there are moderate Muslims who push back against this, they're the ones that have to really push back against extremism here. And I haven't seen the movement. It's kind of like the left, where for a long time, people who were moderate liberals, were too afraid to go against the progressive wing, because the progressive wing is crazy. I mean, you could see it within the LGBTQ movement as well, where you may have people that were, just gay, who wanted gay marriage or things like that, and they wouldn't push back against transgenderism, which is a totally, completely different thing. And shouldn't even be under that umbrella. And it seems like a lot of them were too afraid to push back against it. People that they just wanted to live their lives the way that they wanted to, and they didn't want to impose their gender ideology on other people. So we've seen this in different areas in both secularism and the religious fields. So, but it seems that once you have an extreme that is that powerful and that fervent, if you don't push back against it, then you're going to get swallowed up by it. And too many people are afraid to do that. I think in the United States, we're finally tired of the bullshit, and we're going to call it out. And that's a good thing. And it doesn't make us racist. It doesn't make us bigots. It doesn't make us unsympathetic to the plights of others. We are just tired of our freedoms getting suppressed for extreme minority positions uh, imposed to us by people that don't belong in this country, or who are clearly mentally ill. So this is a problem. We've identified it, and then the US said, we're not doing this bullshit anymore. We're not going to allow it to happen. We're not going to allow it to poison society. And we're going to other people and saying, you can do this too. We did it peacefully here. I I'm pretty sure. Well, we tried to do it peacefully, but President Trump was almost assassinated twice, and we've seen a lot of violence and a lot of rhetoric from the extremist rhetoric from the deep state operatives and the progressive foot soldiers that we see, the useful idiots at campuses and in cities and in blue cities throughout this country, and we see the same thing happen in Europe. And again, what is the reasoning behind this? A lot of it started as political correctness. A lot of it started with the US wanting to become an empire after World War II and taking advantage of the fact that Europe was laying in ruins. Mike Benz, once again, I'll bring him up, talks about this, about how the US essentially became almost two different entities, and that was the domestic United States, mostly controlled by the executive branch because the legislature abdicated its constitutional duties by no longer passing laws or amendments to the Constitution and allowing the presidency to take extreme power and create a bunch of organizations like the Intel organizations, the EPA, the Department of Education, uh, all these organizations under the purview of the executive branch that can create decrees that have the strength of law, but were not laws enacted by Congress, which is the way that under the Constitution, this is all supposed to work. So it's also funny to kind of go on that tangent for a little bit, how we're seeing President Donald Trump now essentially take power away from himself by shutting down executive branch organizations, and the left is telling us that he's an authoritarian for doing so, when really what he's doing is he is reversing constitutional malfeasance and treachery back to the way that the US used to do business. So that is ironic on so many different levels, that by wanting to reduce the size of government, President Trump is seen as an authoritarian. And by forcing Congress to take back its power, because let's be honest, we're not supposed to be fighting wars all over the world without Congress declaring war. We haven't declared a war in decades. We had the AUMF that allowed the war on terror to basically, if you call it terrorism, the president can go out there and do whatever the hell he wants. You know, we went past the kind of emergency mandate and standard where if there is an imminent threat to the United States, and the president can use military force uh, without a declared war for 90 days to do whatever the hell you want, man. And we'll just keep passing money because we're going to get kickbacks on the other side from these defense contractors or from USAID by laundering money through the system, and we're going to get it back, and we're going to prop up corrupt regimes like what we see in Ukraine and in other countries that we've seen thousands and thousands of times over. So this has been going on for decades, man. And a lot of it was to perpetuate an overseas American empire, because that's what happened. A power vacuum was left behind after the European powers collapsed in the aftermath of World War II, and we came in and we essentially took control of the responsibility of the former British Empire and the European empires, because France and Great Britain carved up the Middle East and created this permanent problem that we have here by deciding, let's split up a bunch of countries, but not along the ethnic groups. We're going to mix all these ethnic groups. We're going to create fake regions that now start attacking people who are the rightful people on that land for thousands of years. You guys know who I'm talking about. Israel does have a right to exist. I'm sure I have a different opinion on Israel over many people, but that's because I think there's a spiritual aspect. That doesn't mean that you excuse governments or that we should give people free lunches all the time. But they're a little bit of a different story. You can call me a Zionist all you want. I really don't give a crap. uh, it is what it is. Half of the Christian Bible is the Old Testament anyway, and whether some of the Jews like it or not, Jesus is their Messiah as well. So there's my little religious tirade there. I'm gonna throw it in there. Take it or leave it. I'm sipping my coffee. That's just the way it is. And maybe I'll go deeper in that one day. But it makes my point that we have been perpetuating corruption uh, throughout the world, propping up governments, and it is to gain our own power. So a lot of this is our own doing, right? A lot of the illegal immigration that comes from both the Middle East and from Central and South America and a bunch of other countries are because we created crises, we collapse governments, and then we take some refugees from the mess that we've created. The Europeans do it too. We don't force these people to assimilate, and we also want to give cheap labor or cheap land to our corporations, and they can basically pillage other countries for their natural resources or their land. And this is what we're doing. It is neo-colonialism. So, and I know that people on the right probably hate that term, but it is true. That's exactly what our corporations do. And they steal money from the American people to do so. Because here's the bad part. Here's the really bad part. Maybe if they use some of those things, not justified, right? We shouldn't go into people's countries, kill civilians, and then take their shit. That's a terrible standard to have, especially if we're not under threat. If we're just doing it to make money and get cheap stuff, that is that's BS. For greed and all these other things. But we don't even get the benefit of it as the American people. I remember when everybody's like, "Well, we went to the Middle East for oil." I mean, uh, uh, unless I was seeing gas for 50 cents a gallon in the 2000s, which it was much cheaper during President Trump's first term, no doubt. But my gas prices didn't really drop at the time when we were in Iraq. So they told me it was for the left at the time told me it was for oil. The right told me it was for national security reasons. It was all bullshit as far as I was concerned. It was so defense contractors and companies like Halliburton could make a ton of money from destroying a country, uh, equipping the U.S. military with weaponry all the time. Oh, and then we went in for weapons of mass destruction, which were moved anyway. And then we didn't attack the country that actually took them, which was Syria, when we saw them shipping a bunch of those weapons out of Iraq. So yeah, we went in for weapons of mass destruction. We didn't even destroy the weapons of mass destruction. They went to another country and we didn't even deal with that. And then years later, we give weapons through the CIA to the people that became ISIS and then destabilized Syria and caused another shit show there and pushed a lot of the immigration crisis that's happening in Europe because we destroyed a couple of countries. And oh, by the way, now we're dealing with we're dealing with a destabilized Middle East because, first of all, the French and the British effed everything up after World War One. Then we came in, and yeah, Saddam Hussein was a bad dude. He was killing Kurds and other people that didn't deserve it. He was also a counter to Iran. And when they were fighting Iran, after they overthrew a government that we did install ourselves, I mean, let's be honest, the Shah of Iran was an American puppet, but Iran was a country that was doing all right at the time. They had more westernized values. They didn't have Sharia law or the mullahs in charge. But hey, this is all dominoes that have been falling because Western countries have been fucking everything up, pardon my French, for a long time. So, you know, this is where a lot of this goes. Socrates Magoda is asking me a loaded question that's going to take me on another tirade. I will read the super chat and I'll answer the question. Hold me accountable because you know that I can go on these tangents and get ADD, and I'll talk about Puerto Rico. Uh, thank you for the $5 super chat. Socrates Magoats asked the question, Rolo, what are your thoughts about Puerto Rico being a state, independent, or status quo? So I will talk about that in a little bit after I finish this point. Um, I think that, we caused a lot of these problems ourselves. We destabilized the Middle East. And then, Saddam Hussein and the mullahs hated each other. We had two countries in the Middle East that were fighting each other all the time. And we had funded Saddam Hussein's war against Iran in the 80s, uh, basically screwed him over, which he's a bad dude. I get it. We shouldn't hold deals with bad dudes in the first place. But, and he was committing genocide against the Kurds. And then, he was just like, well, hey, what the hell, man? I was doing your dirty work against the Iranians. You're giving me weapons. And so I'm just going to take Kuwait. Can't have that because we need oil from the Middle East, even though we've got a ton of reserves in our own country. And, I'm sick and tired of that too, because I think you can solve a lot of the world's problems by just isolating the Middle East and letting them kind of like just let them destroy each other. A lot of people may get mad about this, but why do we need to buy oil from countries that absolutely hate us and that have no ties with us whatsoever? They don't. They don't have our same values. They don't care about our rights, and they have nothing to supply us besides oil that we can go and drill ourselves and get for ourselves. Russia's got a ton of oil too. That's another loaded thing. The Russians are a mess. Putin's a bad dude as well, but we got closer ties with Russia culturally than we would with the Middle East or China, that's for sure. And so that was another failed opportunity after the Cold War, not bringing Russia into the fold when we had a chance, allowing that country to fall into corruption under the oligarchs. And then that allows somebody like Vladimir Putin, a former KGB affiliate, to come in and essentially set up a dictatorship here and ally himself with countries that we hate, like Iran and China. So that's another failed opportunity. Now we continue to make them the boogeyman when we've used them as kind of a scapegoat for a long time, and we allowed them to become what they are today. And that's embroiled us in another conflict here with what's going on in Ukraine, which is another country that we used as a stooge for our money laundering and our corruption. We know what Hunter Biden did with Burisma and his father, the big guy. We know that there's been laundering going there for years. We know that the election of Zelensky was most likely a CIA op, and it was a color revolution to push them away from the Russian sphere of influence. Again, not that we like what the Russians do, but you got to respect the game sometimes. And Putin's a pretty crafty character and he knows what buttons to push, but there was no reason to go in there as well. So I think that is something that we should have addressed differently. And I don't know how we're going to resolve that. I don't want the U.S. to supply weapons to Ukraine anymore. I don't want to be involved in that. I think that we just need to get out and Ukraine can do whatever they want at that point. They are a sovereign country, but they can continue to fight. The U.S. doesn't have to help that situation. We got too many problems going on. And again, Europe has a GDP that is equivalent to about 2/3 of the United States. They can spend 2/3 of what we do on the military if they want. And JD Vance, it's so offensive that he called this out the other day in Munich, and it just made everyone's heads explode. It really did. And I'm really tired of it, and I'm glad that Trump is coming in and he is succeeding in ways that I personally never imagined. What DOGE is doing through auditing the federal government is something that I have wanted for years. I would always told the old man Pistolero, anybody that's listened to me, that's what I rave about. If you're around Rolando, what he's going to rave about, I don't want to be president of the United States. So don't even go there. There's no President Rolo on the horizon. I don't want to deal with it. Maybe that's what would make me a decent president because usually it's the people that don't want it that become the best ones. But I don't want it unless light comes from the sky and the Lord Himself says, "Hey, you got to do this." That's not my calling right now. I'm just a dude on the internet trying to figure things out and ranting about politics and playing video games a couple of times a week online. So, and I love talking about the Second Amendment and guns, which is something I haven't done in a while, and I need to go back there as well. And yeah, talking about games and movies, that's a lot of fun too. So maybe I should do more of that. So a patriot from Warsaw does make a good point about that. I understand that treaty and I don't like it, but I also think the problem is that Ukraine has become so corrupted and our own government has used it as a hotbed for corruption that it is basically it almost nullifies that because we created our own problem there. So I really don't know what we do in that case, and I think the world already hates us anyway. So I'm basically at the point where here's where I'm at too. We are going to uncover, and I think this is one of the big things that Trump is going to do, that our government broke the social contract with the American people. The American people come first. And if our corrupt government made deals that undermine the American people and American sovereignty, then they're bad deals. That's just the way that it is. And it may take away some of our credibility in the world, but the problem is that our government has no credibility within our own citizenry. And so I think we have to clean our house first before we can deal with problems overseas. And that is the issue. What DOGE is showing, it is quite possible that half of the US taxpayer budget that we pay is used on bullshit throughout our country and throughout the world. And until we deal with that, we cannot do anything else. That is truly what I believe. And if that means, yeah, that means that we're going to break our word. But if our government was corrupt when they made certain deals and they've been using a lot of those deals to breed their corruption and take advantage of certain situations, then it is our duty to correct and rectify that. And that may mean leaving NATO, leaving the UN, breaking some treaties that we've had in the past because they were not made in good faith when it came to the American people. And that's something that a lot of people aren't going to like. And yes, it may hurt some American prestige, but if we come back, we regain our we've got to regain our soul and our own credibility because we cannot allow our government to dictate and deal in bad faith and corrupt themselves and steal our money to do things overseas. And that's pretty much the way that it is. We have a serious cancer that has infected the United States, and that's the bureaucratic state, the military industrial complex, and foreign aid. This is killing the United States. It's absolutely killing us. And it has caused this country to almost become authoritarian in the last, especially 12 years. And that is something that we have to rectify. And yes, that is going to mean that other countries will probably be sacrificed. So that's what's going on here. So until we can get our house in order, we cannot even justifiably handle a lot of what is going on in the world, especially when so many of our allies that supposedly espouse these these values step up to the plate. And it's going to require pretty harsh uh, it's going to require pretty harsh decisions because again, we're at the point we knew that we had cancer a long time ago. Decades ago, we already knew that we had cancer. We found it. It was treatable. We could have gone through outpatient treatment and we would have been out of there and we could have taken care of it. The problem is that we tripled down on our bad habits, kept eating badly. We didn't get our screenings. We didn't care. We, as the American people, again, eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. We paid attention to our bread and circuses and we allowed the government to deceive us through propaganda, which that's a powerful tool. So, in some ways, there's a little bit of an excuse there because we're fighting against a machine the likes of which we've never seen before when it comes to surveillance and the manipulation of information, the bad faith and greed that has affected this country, which I think comes from a lack of faith and moral values. So I happen to think that that's, a Christian values, but I think we can all agree that there is a lack of morality and a lack of honor in the United States and in the citizenry of the West. We don't have faith anymore. We don't have moral standards that we espouse to, many of us. And the biggest example is that how our leaders, our quote unquote leaders, and politicians conduct themselves, and it's like parents setting a bad example towards children. It feeds everything. A fish stinks from the head down. So when we see politicians acting corruptly, when we see business owners acting corruptly, it infects the entire system. And pretty soon, everybody that doesn't have moral integrity is like, well, these guys are screwing everyone over. They're taking a piece of the pie. So I'm going to do it too. And that's what we've seen in the bureaucratic state in the United States. Maybe things started in good faith. We're going to prevent another Holocaust. We're going to make sure that our country is secure. We're going to prevent the rise of authoritarianism throughout the world. But then when we started securing those things, when we started gaining intelligence to try to prevent wars and we created a state of peace and prosperity, people started looking and they started asking themselves, man, We've got really powerful intelligence agencies. We've got a lot of money. We can surveil powerful people and we can blackmail them and we can control them. And we can do this to world leaders. We can do this to corporations. We can do this to individual citizens. And eventually, this became a vicious cycle that we see today in the politics of the West and pretty much every country, let's be honest, because we know the Chinese are dealing with this crap too. Communist countries deal with it on a much larger scale. Actually, the more authoritarian a regime, the more corrupt it becomes because when you're always worried about getting your head chopped off or getting thrown in the gulags or facing the firing squad, after a while, when you can't get the results that the Politburo, the dictator, or the king wants, you're going to start lying about your books and lying about the numbers to protect yourself, and then the entire system rots and falls apart from within because it was a facade the entire time. So, and yes, excellent point. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. That is true. So, I think that's where we're at. We're in a difficult position, and again, we have terminal cancer at this point. We have no choice. We have to operate. We've got to go through chemotherapy, and we may die in the process of trying to save ourselves. That's probably where we're at. But the first step is leadership in the United States, because whether we want it or not, and as somebody who has leaned more libertarian than anything else for a long time, uh, I see that we don't have any choice. The US is the leader of the world. And as we go, the rest of the world is going to go because we don't want the Chinese to take over. I agree. We don't want that entire mantle of responsibility, but we can't take control of the situation until we set the example. And we got to play hardball on other people that supposedly are our allies when it comes to this. So, this is why we can't accept authoritarianism and censorship in Europe, bringing it all the way around. This has been like an hour and 10-minute rant, which I mean, it's been a while since I've done this. So I've been ready for this. I've been feeling it. I've been reluctant to do it because honestly, I've enjoyed my time chilling out, but I do end up talking politics every day. I don't know if the mod extraordinaire is in the chat, but she hears this all the time. My rantings and ravings, uh, and uh, and the old man hears it all the time as well, and you get a little bit of a taste of it on the show. So, or on the gaming stream. Sometimes I can't help myself. It always happens. And honestly, when you get the old man Pistolero and my uncle together, there's going to be a lot of crap talking, especially when it comes to politics. Again, this is Cafe Crema, which you can order online from prcoffee.com or find it at your local your local supermarket. I'm not getting paid by these people. I'm trying to support American businesses here. So I think I'm going to start moving the tangent here. I will go to Socrates Magote and what he's asking about Puerto Rico being a state, becoming independent, or the status quo. The politics of Puerto Rico are a little bit complicated. I can tell you what I want. I want Puerto Rico to become a state. A lot of things are a little bit. There are complexities behind a lot of this. I'm sure that the old man. Uh, I'm sure that the old man is going to chime in on certain things because he understands the internal politics of Puerto Rico a little bit better than I do. I've become a lot more educated about a lot of what's going on here from living here in the past few months and really uh, uh, doing some deep dives in some of the local corruption in Puerto Rico, some of the ways that Puerto Rico is in a disadvantageous state when it comes to other states in the union, and the way that the U.S. has kind of facilitated this. You've got so just to go back, I'll give a brief history, especially for people that may not know. Puerto Rico is obviously an island in the Caribbean, in the Atlantic and Caribbean, um, just to the east of the Dominican Republic. We are part of the United States since I believe 1916. Puerto Ricans Natural born Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens. However, we don't pay, if you live in Puerto Rico for more than 6 months, you don't pay U.S. income tax. The way that works, you pay to the we call it the state government, even though it's not a state, so the Commonwealth government, because that's what Puerto Rico is. It's a Commonwealth, which is kind of a unique status, but it's essentially kind of a territory, the way that many of the states used to be prior to joining the Union. It was acquired by the United States from the Empire of Spain as a result of the United States victory over Spain in the Spanish American War in 1898, along with the Philippines and Cuba at the time. Cuba chose to become independent. We being the U.S., kept Puerto Rico and the Philippines. Actually, the Philippines was part of the U.S. until pretty much like after the World War II era. Sorry, I don't have that off the top of my head. I don't know Philippine history as well. And then Puerto Rico has remained a part of the United States since. The debate for independence, statehood, and the status quo remaining a commonwealth has been going on for decades now. I think Puerto Rico, I mean, I can say this because I'm Puerto Rican. Now, a lot of this, again, as I've said in this rant that I've had, is that the US government has caused a lot of problems in Central and South America. But there is obviously a cultural issue here that there's usually a lot of corruption within Latin American governments. Some of this, I think, is a remnant of the way that the Spanish Empire used to do things. It was a very aristocratic system, and some of those tentacles of the culture still remain, I think, in Central and South American countries. That would include Brazil, whether they like to believe that or not, because Portugal, the Portuguese Empire, was kind of similar. Even though I think Brazil is in a more unique position, and they weren't a Spanish colony; they were obviously Portuguese, and they speak Portuguese and they've got way more natural resources and a way bigger population. But I think they suffer from a lot of the same issues of corruption because I think Brazil should be a superpower at this point, and they haven't really messed with anybody. They haven't gone to wars or anything like that. So, uh, so that's a different story. So there, I think there is a cultural remnant there from the Spanish Empire. I think that there's another, without going too deeply into it, I think that liberation theology pushed by the Catholic Church is another issue, and the Jesuit branch of the Catholic Church. That's a whole can of worms there that I'm definitely not going to go into in theology. But just to let you know, our current Pope is a Jesuit, and he believes in liberation theology, and he came from Argentina. And you can see what his left wing and globalist tendencies are. And so that's a factor. That's gone on. So I think these are all things that have affected most Latin American countries and even Puerto Rico to a certain extent. Puerto Rico's problems stem from the U.S. treated it as a colony, for a long time, didn't really know what to do. Obviously, at the turn of the century, going there, most Puerto Ricans are triracial. So we're a mix of Spanish Europeans, so white, white Europeans, I guess you would say, which are the Spaniards, um, native tribes, which in Puerto Rico would have been the Taino Indians. Most of them have pretty much been wiped out by disease and things with the Spanish Empire, cullings and things like that. Um, just like many of the native tribes of Central and South America and obviously African slaves, the descendants of African slaves. So that's pretty much everybody in Puerto Rico. If you do a DNA test, you're going to find a little bit of all three of those races. And that's also why, if you look at Puerto Ricans, you can't always tell that people are Puerto Rican because it's kind of like the United States where you have such a blending of different races that you can have Puerto Ricans that look traditionally Hispanic, more brown. You can have people like me who are a little bit lighter skinned and have light eyes. I've got green eyes. You'll see Puerto Ricans with blonde hair, Puerto Ricans with red hair, all of that stuff. So you'll see Puerto Ricans that look, more African American and black. So you'll see a huge mix of that. Uh, so I think that those are all factors. So Puerto Rico has a contentious history too, because many people may not know. If you know Margaret Sanger, she was the founder of Planned Parenthood, and she's the one that really pushed abortion and eugenics in the United States at the turn of the century. Uh, in order to create the birth control pill, uh, Planned Parenthood and her organization, I don't know if it was Planned Parenthood at the time, but they experimented on Puerto Rican women actually, and many of them died. Many of them had many defects. So they were experimented on there because they wanted to use a population that wasn't American, um, and that was kind of displaced from the United States, and basically conduct tests on them to do that, to create the birth control pill. So that's a pretty contentious history, you can imagine. I think the Jones Act is another huge problem. So with everything, what's the beef with between Mexico and Puerto Rico? I mean, it depends on what beef you're talking about. If it's baseball, it's because Puerto Rico has some of the best ball players in history. So I mean, they would have a beef there. Mexico's got some good ball players, but I would argue that Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic have the best ones if we're talking about Latin American ball players. As far as if there's some sort of other beef, it's that Puerto Ricans are Americans and Mexicans aren't by default. That's pretty much it. So a lot of the Puerto Ricans don't care about the immigration issue that other Latinos in the U.S. do. We don't, because we're Americans. That's it. That's it. Period. So we don't care about the border in the same way we do. In fact, a lot of Puerto Ricans hate the fact that Dominicans come over all the time and come here illegally. So we have a very different stance on that, and I think that that's become a wedge issue that a lot of politicians have thrown in there, and that's why it's possible that other Latinos may have beef with Puerto Ricans, because it's a non-issue for us. We are Americans. Um, so if that's where you're going culturally, so uh, oh, there you go. Yeah, that's true. Bill Gates' father was involved with all of that Planned Parenthood as well. Thank you for pointing that out, Den Hawken. So that's why Puerto Ricans have felt like they've been exploited. You've got things like the Jones Act, which means trade uh, on American products can only be done on American ships with American crews and go originate from American ports. So that means that Puerto Rico pretty much has to get everything imported. That causes prices to go up. Uh, Puerto Rico also had very advantageous tax laws up until a couple of decades ago. So we had the most educated population of any Latin region. I'll say region because obviously we're part of the US, so we're not a Latin country, even though we're in this weird state where Puerto Rico gets its own Olympic team, can compete in Miss USA pageants or Miss Universe pageants, and we have our own team in the World Baseball Classic. So somehow we get to do that. We've got our own basketball league and everything too, which is actually pretty fun to watch. So just weird quirks that happen here. Maybe that's a big reason why people don't want to become a state, because they want all that the prestige that comes with that. But that's more of a joke. But I'm sure there are some people that care about that. So I think what affects Puerto Rico is what affects a lot of even poor states in the United States, and some of there's parallels to how taking slavery out of it, how the South was exploited prior to the Civil War. Obviously, slavery was terrible, but the South was basically forced into agriculture. Most of the industrialization was in the North, um, in the northern states. And after a while, that kind of pushed Southern economies to completely rely on agriculture. Now, obviously, they had free labor. So free human labor is a terrible thing, but it's what kept poverty higher in southern states as well, and to an extent that still kind of occurs a little bit today. So Puerto Rico was kind of used for agriculture, things like that, but there was a time when there was advantageous tax laws here. So you had high tech companies like Hewlett Packard and Microsoft come here. You had a massive sugar sugar industry here, and you had obviously rum is another big export here. Pharmaceutical companies came here, but pretty much a lot of American states got angry that Puerto Rico was part of the U.S. but not a state, and got all these tax incentives. And once that those rules were closed up, then Puerto Rico's economy suffered greatly, and that caused a downward spiral. There's debt and corruption here because of that. A lot of people left, so that caused a huge problem in Puerto Rico's tax base. And then after a while, too, Puerto Rico has some of the greatest soil on the entire planet. It's very pure. It's great for agriculture. Yet Puerto Ricans still buy most of their crops, which can be grown in Puerto Rico, from the United States and from other countries, which makes no sense. And this happens in a lot of states. Globalism is a problem with this. So I think some people feel that Puerto Rico would be better off independent because then they wouldn't have to rely on something like the Jones Act that basically imposes Puerto Rico not to have full control over its resources. It has come from the US in many cases, a lot of these products, which pretty much every state has to deal with. But this mostly affects Puerto Rico, but it also affects Hawaii. This is why in Hawaii energy prices are so high, why the price of goods is so high. Alaska is also affected by this. So uh, it's a pretty stupid law created in the early 1900s. So there you go. Not a joke. Some Puerto Ricans don't want to lose. There you go. Camo's jumping in there. That was a 1936 law removed in the 80s or so. Yeah, the 936 law. So that affected Puerto Rico's economy, and Puerto Ricans were very well educated, especially compared to other Latinos, had a higher standard of living, things like that. We still have a pretty educated populace, but that caused a downward spiral where Puerto Ricans were doing very well, and then so many left the island that there was a lot of brain drain, and it caused a lot of the agricultural and textile industries to leave, and it led to Puerto Rico becoming kind of a welfare state in many cases. I believe that the median salary in Puerto Rico at this point is $24,000, which would put it pretty much in the bottom of the United States. Um, so, you, so I think Puerto Rico does need its more of its own sovereignty, but I would argue this with a lot of states. I think that buying local and having local products, globalism has helped in a lot of ways, and it's also undermined a lot of things because you go from regions that are very self-sufficient to being exploited for one export or another. So this has happened throughout the world. You know, that's kind of what colonialism was about. It's a dirty term to use that, but it's true. And this happens to a lot of states as well, right? Like you go to Iowa, they basically just produce corn. They don't produce much of anything else. If you went to Detroit, it was all factories and automotive manufacturing. If you go to Florida, it's pretty much oranges and mostly agriculture and tourism. So it started happening where you have regions of the country which produced multiple different types of products, and people could buy those products locally to consolidation. And consolidation bred convenience, but it also destroys self sufficiency. So, this is where a more libertarian viewpoint would be better. So, I think Puerto Rico, the way that you have to fix some of the problems with Puerto Rico is you have to eliminate the Jones Act. I think it has to become a state. I think that statehood has been dangled in front of Puerto Ricans for a long time, and it seems like the numbers keep going up and down. Puerto Rico has voted multiple times to become a state, but the way that the political parties are structured here is that the opposing party, they're not necessarily down Democrat or Republican lines. There's a little bit of a blend because you have some people who would be considered Republicans that are for statehood or for status quo status, and some people that are Democrats that are for statehood or status quo status. And then you've got the independents who are mostly left wing socialists, if I'm being honest. I don't pay privy to the independent movement. I understand some of what their grievances are, but the fact of the matter is that if we compare Puerto Rico to our closest peers, which would be the Dominican Republic and Cuba, if Cuba were to become a democratic country or a republic, Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic would have no chance to compete against them because it's a much larger country that offers a lot of some of the same things that you're seeing here, which is a tropical island paradise with beautiful geography and great agricultural land. All three islands are basically similar in that regard, and you've got a Latin culture. Obviously, there's some unique factors which each of them, but they're similar. So, but Cuba is obviously an authoritarian regime that has nothing good going on there. The Dominican Republic is a third world country, and Puerto Rico would fall the same way because you'd have a country that has a more educated society that has a higher standard of living that now has to accept no aid from the United States, and I think it would have less to offer in some ways to than those two countries do. So, and I'm sure a lot of Puerto Ricans would get mad at me for saying that, but I think that that's the harsh truth. So, I think that, you know, uh, Puerto Rico has to take advantage of the fact that it's part of the United States. But, Trump always talks about a trade deficit that goes on. The trade deficit between Puerto Rico and the mainland United States is absolutely egregious. And there's no reason why Puerto Rico should buy more mangoes when we literally have mango trees growing everywhere from countries like Brazil than having them from themselves. And I would argue that too with like Florida. There's no reason why Floridians should be buying oranges from California or orange juice that's produced in California when we produce so many oranges in Florida. So I think there needs to be a deconsolidation and more self sufficiency when it comes to different states and when it comes to Puerto Rico as well. Puerto Rico also has, the corruption here, with notwithstanding, is terrible. Hurricane Maria obviously exacerbated the problem because you went from the island having a population of around 4 million people to down to 3.5 million people, with that half a million mostly going to Central Florida. And that's why, for a while, Marco Rubio, before he was the Secretary of State, and Rick Scott kind of became the de facto senators of Puerto Rico. And that's another thing. Puerto Rico has what's called a shadow senator who sits in Congress, but they have no voting authority or anything like that. So, that's it. We can't vote in U.S. elections. We are U.S. citizens, but unless we live in the mainland and we have residency in the mainland, we can't vote in presidential elections. So it's this a weird status where we also get less Medicare and Medicaid benefits, but we pay half. We don't pay federal income tax. We pay it to the state. So you can live in Puerto Rico. There are people that come from the mainland. I don't want to say Americans because we're all Americans, but where mainlanders do come to Puerto Rico as a tax haven. So if you work remotely, you could move to Puerto Rico. And if you're here for more than 6 months and don't have any of your primary domiciles in the US, you can kind of take a tax benefit by doing that. But, I think self sufficiency is one thing. The power grid is a huge issue here because we have to import, obviously, oil. The Puerto Rican government has tried to do big solar initiatives, but solar panels and solar farms are really stupid in Puerto Rico because we are in a hurricane area for the same reason why this is stupid in Florida as well. I think you have to switch to I think nuclear power would be awesome, but it's a small island and there are earthquakes. We do live near the Caribbean fault. We do have hurricanes, even though they haven't hit as often as Florida's gotten hit in recent years, which is crazy to believe. But it's still a huge threat. I think you have to switch to a micro grid, kind of a microgrid configuration, which some towns in Puerto Rico have shifted to, which is basically all the buildings have solar panels. And so you just deal with each building being independent. It's very mountainous. The infrastructure is difficult to maintain because of that mountainous nature. So you've got roads that are going all over the place through the mountains. The terrain is tough. So a standard electrical grid of above ground wire is difficult. It's solid like limestone and rock. So underground lines is very difficult. It would cost billions upon billions of dollars to upgrade the infrastructure. So I think you have to go more localized. Again, these are issues that any mountainous territory is going to deal with. We're not connected to the mainland. So unlike when we have hurricanes in Florida, we can import a lot of line workers from other states very quickly and we can resolve the issue. Can't do that in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico also during Hurricane Maria, because it is, even though it is in the Caribbean, because it is part of the United States as a territory, it falls under the Department of Defense purview of Central Command. Central Command does not handle U.S. military operations in the Caribbean. Southern Command does. So Central Command had difficulty running a lot of the operations in Puerto Rico to give aid. A lot of people blame President Trump. I think Trump's biggest problem is that everyone accused him of being an authoritarian in his first term, and he was basically a more of a constitutionalist. So he allowed independent, um, you know, individual governors and state governments to run their aid that FEMA provided. We know FEMA is a shit show anyway. So, I mean, look, if we saw how bad FEMA was in North Carolina and in Eastern Tennessee, after Hurricane Helene, imagine a territory that's not even a state that is more than 1,000 miles from the mainland. It's going to be a shit show no matter what you do. And then you have the added corruption of the local state government, and it was doomed to have issues. You had aid that was delivered by the U.S. military and the National Guard of other states that was left to rot for months in warehouses here. That's not President Trump's fault. That's a failure of the local government and of FEMA. So these are all things that affect Puerto Rico. Um, so it's crazy. So there's a lot of problems here, but yes, what can fix Puerto Rico? We have to have local agriculture so that we buy things locally. We shouldn't be importing food, most of our food from the United States. We produce some of the best milk in the world because Puerto Rican cows are the dairy industry here can sustain the island. And it's some of the best, like I said, some of the best soil in the world. It's the most fertile. We have multiple species, breeds of cows that come here, and those combinations actually create some of the best milk in the world with sustainable farming. We don't have like big factory farms or things like that in Puerto Rico. It's still pretty much independent. So you get more organic and holistic farming. A lot of the local agriculture is that way as well. We know that, especially with RFK coming in, we're going to see the corporate farming, even though it can produce mass quantities of food, a lot of it is garbage. So a lot of our, fruits and vegetables have been genetically modified. There's different, uh, medications and things injected in the food that we eat. That's something that you don't deal with really as much in Puerto Rico. And that's something that I think that would be an advantage and will reduce a lot of the cost of living in Puerto Rico. Now, the problem is that the Puerto Rican state government has designated a lot of land for agriculture that's very pure, but they only allow people to lease that land, not purchase it. So local farmers have difficulty owning their own farms. They're stuck on government leases, and the government ends up taking the land that they designated for agriculture and selling it to large corporations for resorts or wealthy people for building massive housing communities and things like that instead of using it for something that may benefit the local population here. So that's a Puerto Rican problem. Um, I think a concern that people have becoming part of the U.S. is that we'd probably end up having higher property taxes, which would, since so many people live in poverty here, that would cause issues. So some things are a catch 22. Some things can be resolved by Puerto Rico, incentivizing certain things, but we have a massive amount of debt here too. It's like California. So there's a high sales tax here. In some cases, the sales tax is 10% plus you have a municipal tax. So you'll pay like 11, 12, 13% in sales tax in a place where your goods are almost as expensive as like Miami for the most part, which is a very high cost of living area. And you have import taxes on vehicles and things like that. So the average vehicle in Puerto Rico also costs $7,000 more than on the mainland. And when most people are making around $24,000 a year, even if the cost of housing is less, which it is in Puerto Rico, the cost of food, the cost of energy, and the cost of most other goods is higher. So it creates this vicious cycle. So, like every other issue that we're dealing with today in the United States and throughout the world, it's a very complex and nuanced issue. I think Puerto Rico would benefit from becoming a state. I think that Democrats and Republicans both don't want it because it's an issue that they can dangle in front of voters. I think Republicans are probably afraid that it will become a blue state and it's going to have a lot of social welfare. A lot of that welfare is caused by problems that the U.S. created in the first place and that some of the corruption created here by eliminating the incentives. I think the U.S. could make it some sort of a tax haven again if they wanted to that would benefit locals and the U.S. A la maybe what President Trump has in mind for Gaza, which is one of the craziest plans ever. And I think that's where I'm going to kind of finish the show because I don't have that much time left. So those are the multitude of issues. So I'd like to see Puerto Rico become a state, but the argument still continues. I do think, unfortunately, because of some of the mishandling and just the unfairness of how some of the laws are both locally and with the disparity of stupid trade rules in the United States, um, more the independence movement has gained traction over the last few years, which sucks. And a lot of people just don't care. They just want the Commonwealth movement. I personally have loved living here over the past few months. I'm going to stay here longer. I think it's a beautiful place. I think that if you're a mainland US citizen, uh, it's a great place to live, but you have to understand the caveats that yes, your infrastructure is going to be less. There are moments when you feel like you're in a third world country, but I've also driven through many places in the Rust Belt in the United States that are as bad or worse. So I don't think that's an indictment on Puerto Rico. I think that's a fact of where we are in the 21st century, where we've seen government corruption and malfeasance basically destroy a lot of industry and regions throughout the United States as a whole. So I think Puerto Rico is just a microcosm of all of this. So that's just that's those are my 2 cents. Thank you for Camo for dropping in more information there. Again, if you want to help American industries buy Puerto Rican coffee, there's a lot of other products that we sell here. I don't think you can get Puerto Rican milk imported into the U.S., but it is fantastic. I love it with my Puerto Rican coffee. It's great. But yeah, I think agriculture is going to be a big part of saving Puerto Rico, becoming more self-sufficient in that regard, and that's something that also a lot of states need to do. I do think that we need to deconsolidate and make things more local because shipping costs are really one of the biggest driving costs of any product that we have. So just like how we want to bring back our economy and manufacturing from China and Central and South America, I think that that even works in the smaller economy of the national economy of the United States. There's no reason why, when we have multiple states that can produce multiple things, why we have to import and export them across the country. Some things are highly specialized that require factories to build. I get it. Airplanes, computer chips, things like that are highly sophisticated, and you can't necessarily distribute the supply chain easily, at least not the factories. But when it comes to food and agriculture, that's definitely a lot easier to do. So I think that that's something that we need to look at. And I think yeah, we got to reduce taxes all around the board, and that will help things out to incentivize people. But I do think, especially now, kind of going to the trade wars and the tariffs, there's no reason why Americans should be in a lot of ways going. And I will say this will be my little tirade and my Puerto Rican pride coming in here. It is cheaper to go in a lot of cases to the Dominican Republic or to Cancun because they have all expenses paid places, but that's because they can pay wages way below minimum wage or wages that any American could accept in those places, and that's why those trips are cheaper. However, if you come to the US, don't have to convert your currency. You still drive American cars. You do have a internet here, as wireless internet as far as cellular service is actually pretty phenomenal here. I'm impressed by it. I think this was one of the most connected regions in the entire country pretty early on when 5G rolled out, just because it's difficult to run data lines. So 5G is almost ubiquitous all over the island, and it's pretty high quality. So remote work is pretty viable here. You don't need a passport. Your U.S. dollars are good. Pretty much everybody speaks English and Spanish. The road infrastructure is the same as far as signs and things like that. For some reason, gasoline is in liters and distances are in kilometers, but speed is in miles per hour. So it's going to mess with you a little bit. And it doesn't make any sense, but that's just the way it is here. uh, so it's like it uses the metric and the English system of measurements. So that's a little bit wild, but whatever. And it's a place that you can just move to as an American. Gun laws have gotten better here. I need to look a little bit more into it because I know a couple of the governors really wanted to have concealed carry reciprocity where you could come, but it's much better than it used to be. But it's kind of in between where a lot of states are as far as gun ownership here. I've seen a lot of gun stores. There's way more gun ranges that there used to be. The gun laws used to be very draconian, very similar to New York. I think it has a lot to do with the ties that Puerto Rico and New York have had, just because a lot of Puerto Ricans immigrated to New York in the 1950s and 60s, and they brought back a lot of those politics back with them in a lot of cases. But that's changed a lot as of late, and you're seeing gun culture really start to thrive and expand here in Puerto Rico, especially as people become concerned about illegal immigration and drugs, just like in other parts of the United States. So I think that those are all great things. So I'd encourage you guys to come and visit the island. And if you fall in love, you can live here and it's not difficult because you're not moving to another country. So that's my little unexpected rant on Puerto Rico. So uh, man, what else was I going to talk about here? Now I went off that tangent. I did want to talk a little bit about Tulsi and RFK, but I think we'll save that for next week when we can also talk about Cash Patel and what he's doing. I think, long story short, we saw the political grandstanding by the Democrats and some of the rhinos in the Senate, but it was inevitable that this was going to be passed. And I think this goes to the 4D chess move of Donald Trump initially trying to nominate Matt Gaetz, who we know at this point was radioactive. And I went over this in the last rant that I had a few months ago, where and you can look at the tape because this was before Gaetz was taken out of the running for it. That I said, could Matt Gaetz be a sacrificial lamb, and could Trump play 4D chess with him and basically almost pull him out, use him as a he was so radioactive and so controversial that he made, even to the left, Tulsi, RFK, Cash Patel, and Pete Hegseth look like they were nothing. Because let's be honest, now we've kind of seen it. Matt Gaetz did some shit that wasn't good. He did. He effed around, and it's pretty clear. Yes, he was never convicted, but Matt Gaetz is he's a shady dude. He was partying way too much. I love a lot of the things that he says politically, but uh, he seems a little bit sleazy, and I think that that's come to pass. So I think it was a brilliant move on Trump's part. He kind of did Matt Gaetz dirty. Maybe Matt Gaetz was in on it, and he wanted to get out of Congress before the judicial, paperwork came out on him, which they threw it out there anyway. He didn't want to deal with all that stuff, possibly being censured or thrown out dishonorably. So I think Trump pulled a move there, and I believe that he basically kicked him to the curb, and it made everyone else much easier to get confirmed. And I think we're going to look back and that we're going to know that was probably the case. And I think at this point, Cash is the only one left that is going to have any sort of maybe difficulty, but I'm pretty sure that Cash is going to be a slam dunk. And Cash is going to clean house. Cash is going to clean house. I hope that we get the Epstein list. I hope that something more comes of the JFK, RFK, and MLK files. Um, I feel like I hope we're not disappointed by that. The Epstein list, I don't think that's going to be a disappointment. I think what I think it's going to just blow everything up. Um, so we'll see. But if JD's got to come in to pinch hit and get that extra vote, he's going to do it, and we'll get Cash in there, and then Cash is just going to completely turn the FBI upside down, and it's going to be glorious. And then if you think the left is going crazy over DOGE, they're really going to go crazy over that. So I think I'll end the show talking a little bit about, yeah, I don't really like to talk about gossip and palace intrigue, but I do think that the situation with there's a few different levels with what is going on with what happened with Elon Musk and Ashley St. Clair. And I don't think I've ever talked about Ashley St. Clair before. I saw her on different shows like Tim Pool and other shows before, and I was like, okay, well, she's like conservative commentator. She's throwing the usual bullet points, like whatever. Okay, she's just another one of these conservative uh, influencer talking head type people. I think who was it of like 5 years ago basically called it, and I would recommend everyone watching the video on it. And that is let's bring it up here. I should have had this ready to go, but here we go. Hopefully this doesn't start playing on its own. But you can check out Hunter Avalone. I haven't really watched Hunter Avalone before this either myself. But this video did come up a long time ago, and I was like, oh yeah, that's right. It's this chick. So by all accounts, I mean, look, there's a few different concerns. I'm sure a lot of you know the main controversy going on here that Elon, for better or for worse, we can love what Elon is doing in Doge, but if there's one thing that I've learned is you can't treat people like idols and heroes. The only person that I look at as a true idol is Jesus Christ, my Lord and Savior. And that's it. Everybody else is going to fall short. We live in a fallen world. We're all sinners. Even the best of us are going to fall and make terrible mistakes. Some mistakes are much worse than others. Some people are good people that sometimes make mistakes or do bad things, and some people are bad and they do really horrible things. And then some people start off bad and then they end up being good, and some people start off good and end up being bad. That's just the nature of the world that we live in and the nature of humanity itself. So I think Elon's got to have better judgment, and he should keep his pants on more often, uh, and use protection. You should never believe anybody that tells you that they're on birth control or anything like that. I recommend not having one night stands with people or having sexual relations with somebody that you're not married to or in a committed relationship with. That's just me. You can conduct yourselves as you want. I'm not. I'm just telling you that that's how I've conducted business. I've never randomly hooked up with anybody or anything like that, and I don't have any children out of wedlock or any kids at all. So I think it works out pretty well in that regard. So that's what I would recommend for most people, but you guys can do whatever you want. Um, but I think one of the bigger things that this is exposed is one, it looks like this Ashley St. Clair was planning this for a long time. She looks like an obvious right wing grifter. She was, if you watch this video, it seems like she was an cam girl, and she used that to weasel her way into the conservative movement and essentially become a grifter, become famous, and use her womanly wiles to to basically, gain prominence here. So, and I think it also highlights a lot of the hypocrisy of a lot of other conservative commentators, which, look, great that she didn't abort her child. That's all fantastic. Hopefully, she ends up being a good mom to this kid. Hopefully, Elon gets a little bit more involved as a father. But it exposed a lot of con ink and a lot of people that were kind of praising this and what's going on instead of saying it. It's like, look, people can fall, we can have grace, but sometimes we either need to stay out of it or we need to, hold to our moral standards here. And if there's one thing that I've learned from my personal experiences of starting in the Second Amendment advocacy industry, moving to YouTube and gaming and all this stuff, is that there's a lot of people who portray themselves one way and they are a different one. They're either we all know that it's a persona and it's fake, or they portray themselves and they lie about themselves publicly. Ashley seems to be one of those that's done that, and I've met plenty of people that are like that. It's disappointing. It's something that I learned early on in the gun space. A lot of gun tubers. I'm sure you've heard a lot of their dirty laundry over the years, so it's not acceptable. It's even worse when you're a person that portrays themselves as a conservative, as a moralistic person or a Christian, and then it turns out that you're a hypocrite. Again, it's not that people can't make mistakes, but creating a persona and portraying yourself one way and not being that way, that is the problem. So I think that's something that we've been seeing a lot more, and I can tell you that the problem with the right for a long time has been the right was so beaten down when it came to politics, when it came to entertainment and the media, that and because we were so disparaged, called racist, called bigots, called every name in the book, called Nazis and things like that, that there was a desperation on the right that anybody that was either a former leftist or a minority figure or anything like that that comes and joins the right wing movement or the gun movement or whatever you'd call it, the conservative gaming space or the freedom, the free speech movement. I don't really know what to call the entertainment side of things. I guess we're more of like free speech and gaming. Uh, there was a desperation for, like, they're one of those people that was on the other side, or they're going to change the narrative because now we've got somebody that's like a brown or black person or a woman that's come over here, and now they're on our side, and now we can tell everybody, say, hey, we're not sexist, racist, or bigoted. These people are on our side. And the problem is that means that we started bringing people in that we didn't vet, or that we were so desperate for that we overlook some of their flaws. And so some people, especially, being a Christian, you have to have grace. And so you want to take people at their word if they say that they've had some sort of religious epiphany and all this stuff, but you can't be naive either. Um, and you also can't be desperate for validation. If you feel that you're on the right side of things and your values are correct and you believe them, you don't need somebody on the internet to validate those viewpoints or to grift. And so I always just tell people, have a discernment here. Have some sort of discernment. Be careful who you watch. Don't idolize people. Don't give money. Like, if you're entertained by people on the internet, go ahead and give them money. But when it comes to supporting different things or organizations, just be wary of that thing and don't fall in the trap. Because some people are too good to be true. That's just the truth. That's rule number one on the internet, like of the internet, that I've said before, and that's why even I've had difficulty going down the YouTube path, because I'm a little bit jaded by all of that I've seen in my years of doing this. It's like, man, some people are just full of crap. So, and that sucks. It's a shame. It is what it is. But you got to be realistic about it and try to stay true to yourself. And depending on what side of it you're on, whether you're behind the camera or somebody that's watching at home, just have discernment. Don't be naive about things. Trust but verify, and keep to yourself. Really, that's the easiest way. Like, uh, keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer, but also don't lose faith when people disappoint you. I talk about this when I talk about the founders, because a lot of people on the left love to try to invalidate the Constitution and the truths that we hold self-evident as Americans, because they point to the founders, because some founders owned slaves. Some of them weren't that nice of people. Some of them didn't hold the religious values that the others espoused, and they were imperfect human beings. So they try to use that as an excuse to invalidate freedom of speech, the Second Amendment, uh, you know, and everything else that's in the Bill of Rights. And you can't do that. So just because this goes with religion or moral viewpoints or anything like that, if you think that somebody has a good message and you appreciate the message and it's helped you out, and they happen to fail and be a hypocrite, don't let that destroy what the message was. That just means that the messenger was not good, but that doesn't mean that the message wasn't right. So you might be disappointed in some people. You never want to idolize or put people on a pedestal, but if your values, if you feel confident in your values, if you are confident in the person that you are, and you've got your compass in the right order, don't let the message be corrupted because people that may have been giving the message have been corrupted themselves. So I think that's really the big takeaway and what I would say about all of this. So I don't know how people feel about people's reactions to all of this. I don't really want to go into it. I hope this doesn't become a huge waste of time when we have so many other things going on. It does. There's a lot of moral questions here, obviously. That's something that we need to tackle as individuals. Obviously, we don't want people to have children out of wedlock. It's not a good thing. A lot of problems, a lot of the problems in this country with are caused by the destruction of the family, obviously. So the ideal is always to have a mother and a father that can raise their children and do all of that. Divorce is a terrible thing. Infidelity is a terrible thing. Not taking care of your children and being there for them is a terrible thing. These are all things that are kind of rotting our society, and they're things that the powers that be have taken advantage of, and they've tried to promote it as well. I think that there's a huge battle of the sexes that's been going on, and there are a lot of people that want men and women to hate one another. And stories like this don't help either. But I think for the most part, and I've always believed this, you know, people know my story and things that may have happened to me. And I used to be married. It didn't work out. That doesn't take away my faith in marriage or anything like that, or make me angry at women or think that men should be angry at women or anything like that. I don't believe that whatsoever. I think that there are a lot of people that want to take advantage of that and push that. There are a lot of people that want men and women to go against one another and put each other down. And I think that some of the examples that we see on the internet, whether it's Pearly Things or Andrew Tate, are some of the worst examples that we can possibly see and look towards, and they're actually extremely destructive. And the left has its own equivalent of those people too. So I think we all need to be better, and we all need to strive for better on a on a moral, platform, so to speak, and that will help our society immensely because it's true. Uh, we're meant for men and women to be together. Marriage is a good thing on the whole, and obviously we want people to have kids and to have healthy families and all of that, especially in a society now that birth rates are dropping and things like that. We don't want people to get abortions. Really, life is precious, but we also can't fall into this trap of this battle of the sexes and this bitterness that we have because there's a lot of bad examples on the internet, and you can't lose hope because look, we've all gone through bad experiences, and you shouldn't judge a person that you're going out with because maybe you were hurt by somebody else in the past. It's not fair. And that goes for men and women. Like, don't become a man-hating misandrist because you had a guy that cheated on you. Same thing for the men. Don't become a woman-hating misogynist because you got cheated on, or you had a bad experience and all that stuff. Because at the end of the day, too, we have to try to judge who we're with. So you have to have discernment in the relationships that you have. Some people are deceptive and it happens and you get unlucky. It is what it is. Some things just don't work out. People fall out of love and all that. It can happen. So we try to do the best that we can, but don't judge everybody on bad examples that either we see on the internet, which is always going to exaggerate things, and we're going to see the worst of the worst on the internet because the algorithms want us to see dramatic bull crap that doesn't help anybody. And don't judge your past experiences and impose them on somebody else. That's my advice. And it's okay to be single too. If you don't want to be in a relationship and you're happy being alone, that's okay too. And I think that that's something that too many people don't say. Like, you're not a loser if, as a man or a woman, if you don't get married or anything like that. Obviously, it's great, but if you never meet somebody that you really fall in love with and you don't click, and you're happy with yourself and you're living a good moralistic life, it is what it is. Take care of some cats and dogs and enjoy yourself and your independence. There's nothing wrong with that either. So that's what I have to say. That's my little 2 cents on life advice, if I may give that, and kind of what I think about that situation. I will be back next week. I'm trying to figure out whether I'm going to do rants on Wednesdays or if I'm going to do them on Sundays. I may do the daily clips as well again. It kind of just depends. My schedule's a little bit wild now because I am taking care of these two little cats. So it can be hard being a lone patriot from Warsaw. Believe me, I get it. Um, it can be, but that's why we gotta have friends too. Friends are important. Having people close to you, um, maintaining relationships with people. So it is very important. Finding communities of people. The internet can be good for that. We don't want to get sucked into echo chambers, but you can find places, and like, take care of an animal too. Like, you don't feel as lonely when you've got an animal there with you that loves you unconditionally. So that does help. But get out, work on yourself, stay healthy, work out, read books, find hobbies, find things that make you forget. If you are suffering from loneliness, that's some advice that I can give as well. Find hobbies, things that you're passionate about. So and and really you know let yourself get a little bit buried in those things. There's nothing wrong with that as long as you don't become unhealthily obsessive. Don't look, don't go to OnlyFans or look at porn all day. That will destroy you too. So that's more of my moralistic advice. I mean, you can do whatever you want, but don't do things that are empty. Find things that are actually fulfilling. Volunteer, help people out, help animals out, whatever you can. Do things like that. That you interact with people, even if you're a little bit antisocial. That's some advice that I could give you. So it'll make you feel good about yourself, and people will appreciate what you do in order to help them out. So that's what I got for you. So I'll let you know. G Webs in the chat. Great to see you. What I decide, if I do start it, it'll probably be the week after, unless something really crazy happens and I need to go live on Wednesday because we got to talk about it. Like, like Trump pulls us out of NATO. Like, I saw that supposedly he was thinking about here in a tweet just before the show started. I'll also talk about pop culture stuff too, if you guys want it. So if you guys want me to talk about video games, I honestly have not been paying attention to pop culture. I haven't been to the movies in a long time. I've been playing a lot of older video games because a lot of them are a lot better. So I've been going through like the early 2000s Xbox catalog. Obviously, I still play Fortnite because Fortnite's a lot of fun. So, that's what I've got there. So I will be back for sure on Friday for the Fortnite stream. We did it on Thursday this week, just because I it was Valentine's Day on Friday and I had plans. So yeah, we'll be back on Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern time. I forget because I'm on Atlantic Standard Time, so I'm an hour ahead. Uh, G Web's talking about that 9mm is the least fulfilling caliber. Atomic Heart, I should try that out. It was on Game Pass for a while. I didn't. I do want to try that game that looks kind of like that. That's coming out soon, but it looks like it's in Great Britain instead of like the Neo-Soviet Union. It looks like a cross between Bioshock, We Happy Few, and Atomic Heart. So yeah, I think the problem with pop culture is that there's just it's true, and I can even admit this from being on shows in the past, TMN Tuesday night's main event and all that stuff. Is that after a while, the woke people keep doing woke stuff, and we can complain about it. I think we need more of the Rippas in the world, creating the Rippaverse and things like that. It's going to take time for us to create our own culture, though. So we're still going to have this conflict between companies being woke and producing bullshit to make money for a couple more years, but it does get old after a while. And sometimes I think talking about the joy of gaming and going back because look, I'm an older millennial. We have a lot of people in Gen Z coming up that were either really young when a lot of these early 2000s games came out. They've gotten remasters or they're still backwards compatible. And some of them haven't played these games. So I think it's great to go back and play the older Final Fantasy games, to play the Metal Gears, the Halos, the Gears of War games, the Mass Effects, all that stuff, and go back into that back catalog and show people kind of like what I consider was the peak of gaming, which really was the PS1 to Xbox 360 era, and probably the early PS4 era in some cases. But that really was the golden age for me. Obviously, before that we had the 2D console era, and that was fantastic as well. And I think it is great to go back to the old platformers and Sega Genesis era and all of that. But I think it's easier to go back to those 2000s games because they're still a little bit modern, but they're definitely of a higher quality when it comes to a narrative and gameplay perspective than what we have today. So take care, everyone. Good night. God bless. I appreciate all of you being here. Uh, Smash the like button if you like the show. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you want to support what I do here, I do have Patreon, Cash App, those things. I did start the Patreon recently just to avoid the YouTube tax. I appreciate the super chats from Greg the Goblin earlier, from Socrates Magoat, and from Devin Piazza. You guys are awesome. I appreciate you. But if you want to go on Patreon instead, that'll help. Again, I'm trying to help these two little cats here. I could not rescue their mother or their other brother, which devastated me on Monday. If you'd seen me on Monday, I was pretty emotionally shot and distraught. Uh, they'd both gotten hit by cars. The mom had disappeared for a few days, and I didn't know what happened to her. Somebody that tries to help animals around here in Puerto Rico said that she'd gotten hit by a car. And I saved Minnie Moo, as I call him, and Lucy. Those are the names of the cats that I'm taking care of now on Monday morning. And when I went to go look for little Ginger, I found him on the side of the road and he'd gotten hit by a car, and it was pretty awful. And I felt horrible that I wasn't able to save them sooner. But so at least I've got these two, taking them to the vet. I'm gonna try to get them spayed and neutered and all this stuff. I have my own cat here, so those little cats are on a farm that's part of the family, not too far from here, and I'm raising them there, and they're quarantined since they're street cats. But they're beautiful. I'll make some videos about them, and yeah, so hopefully you'll see more of them as they grow up. Puerto Rico, a permanent move. I mean, I wouldn't mind staying here. There's a few different things. I don't know. It's something that you know maybe my life will lead me here. Maybe I'll stay here for a little bit, but I'm definitely staying here for at least a few more weeks. And I've enjoyed my time here. So, and it's not like it's far. It's like a 2 hour flight from Florida anyway. So I can always go back and forth. It's always an option. My family's got properties here, so I can go pretty much between Florida and Puerto Rico at will. And hurricane season in Florida seems like it's been a crapshoot lately. The problem is that when the power goes out here, it usually goes out for weeks. So that's definitely something that's not great. But I've been long winded enough. God bless everybody, and I will catch you on the next one. Take care.